So, Derek, welcome to What If I Say Yes? How are you today?
I'm well, Lucia. How are you?
Okay, Derek. So, the first thing that I ask my guests to do is to introduce themselves to my audience. So, who are you?
Probably a complicated question with a very simple answer. I'm Derek. I am a professor at Ithaca College. I've been here for 10 years, I guess, actually getting ready to start year 11. I have two children, one who's getting ready to turn 14 next week, and one who's, I can't believe I have a 14, an almost 14-year-old, and one who is 11 and wishes he were turning 14 next week. And we've been in Ithaca together now for a little more than a decade, just sort of loving life.
Very nice. Okay. Maya just turned 13, and I know
teenage years.
Yes. So, I mean, you have boys, I have a girl, but if at any point you have any advice on how to deal with teenagers, just let me know.
Yeah, hire someone else to do it. I'm not entirely sure. There's some fun things that have come up by virtue of my kids aging into their teenage years, and the fact that they are close enough in age. So Hendrix being 11 and not quite being a teenager doesn't mean that he doesn't still do teenagery things, because he sees his brother do them and whatnot, and it's quite an adventure. I will say that for sure.
Oh yeah. It would be a different conversation for a different YouTube channel to speak about the differences and the similarities of your teenage years or my teenage years with our kids. But that's a completely different conversation. So going back to the what if I say yes. So you, okay. So after my computer decided to crash, we're back again with Derek.
Glad to be back.
We were talking about having a different conversation about teenagers, etc. But that was for a different Zoom. So, tell the audience what you remember generally of how we met, if you remember anything. I have a very general sense, and I will say that after you go. So you first.
Yeah, my general sense about how we met was actually something that came to mind after watching your episode with Jen Spitzer. And I was fairly convinced that how we had met was actually at a cookie party that was hosted at my house. Yes. So the cookie party was something, I mean, we started maybe like in 2014, 2015, I can't remember exactly. And the idea was just to have an event on hand for people across the departments on the third floor of Muller, which has, politics, English, history, some other folks. And for those of us who had kids, to get us together in a world where our kids can actually hang out and have a good time. So yeah, we were doing the cookie parties, and Carlos and I had already met and had connected, but I'm pretty sure that was the first time that I had met you and Maya, because I don't recall meeting her before the cookie party. And we talked, but we had a limited amount of time and opportunity to talk because there were quite a few people there, and it was pretty loud. So it was shortly after that, a couple of weeks after that, that you and Carlos had invited us to your house for dinner. And I remember being incredibly excited about going there, in part because I can't remember if you're vegetarian or vegan, but it was, one of the first times I was going to have I had been invited to a dinner party with somebody who was vegetarian or vegan, and I was really excited about, what the menu was going to be, and just to get a chance to talk with you without having a ton of people around to distract us. So that's my first memories of meeting with you are those two things, right? The cookie party at our house, and then the dinner party that you and Carlos invited us to afterward.
Very nice. Yes, I do remember that cookie party, and I don't remember if that was the first time we met, but most likely it was. And then, I remember you had just bought that house, correct?
Yeah.
So And it must have been either the first or the second year we got here. We got here in the summer of 2013.
Mhm.
So yes, it was pretty soon that the English department, we were welcomed by the English department.
You still are.
Yes, thank you. Because we went to one or two cookie exchange parties, and
Mhm.
I think I know better most of you than the people in the politics department.
They didn't host a cookie party. They should have done that.
No. And yes, we visited your lovely house, and I had different conversations with different people, very interesting people always.
Mhm.
Um, do you remember what we gave you? What food we served you when you came? I mean, at that point we were trying to be vegan. I
Okay.
had started in 2010 when we moved to Brownsville, Texas.
Mhm.
It was a new thing I wanted to try, and we did start to become healthier. But then little by little things have kind of gone back to where they were, but not completely. So right now we're a mesh of a little bit of everything. We kept a few things about being vegan, vegetarian. There are certain things that we don't eat that we did in the past. But at that time, 2013, I think we were more strictly vegan.
Mhm.
Do you remember what we gave you? What food I made?
Yeah, so it was well, I remember that there was a rice dish that had mango in it. I remember that. Yeah,
Okay.
and something with black beans as well. And
Okay.
I'm trying. I mean, it was a while ago, so I can't remember exactly, but I remember that specifically because the mango in the rice was something that I had not had prior to that. So.
Oh, very nice. Well, I'm glad that you have good memories
All good memories, yes.
of
Yes.
that. Oh, thank you very much. So now let's get into the meat of this, the meat we vegan. If this were a psychoanalytic session, we'd be like, oh, it's interesting that you said meat after speaking about being vegan. Anyway, I ask you to come and share a moment in your life when you ask a question. What if I say yes? You said yes, and then you did something. I don't
Mhm.
know what it is. It will be a surprise for me. So there you go.
It was a bit of a surprise for me even to think about this question because you had posed it to me and said, don't tell me until we meet up. And I went through several different instances in my life where I had said yes to something. But I think the one that ended up shaping me the most that I wanted to talk about today was saying yes to going to graduate school, which was not something that I had planned at all. And so that's the thing that I want to dive into.
So how come you didn't plan? You meaning like when you were a kid, you'd never thought that you would go,
I
that you would do that?
Yeah, so as a kid growing up, my mom, who was the stable parental force in my life over the entirety of my childhood, uh, she had a motto that she offered up, which was basically when you graduate, you go to college or you go to work. But the thing is, nobody in our family had gone to college. I have an uncle who lives in Southern California who had taken some courses towards a bachelor's degree in engineering. And my mother, when I was around the age of 12 and 13 years old, had taken courses through a nursing program to become a registered nurse. But outside of that, in my immediate and extended family, we couldn't point to a single person who had been to college, right? People just graduated high school and went to work. So I didn't have the legacy of several generations of my family going to college or going to one specific college. I didn't even really have it in mind that I was going to go to college. I actually was, pretty determined to become a professional athlete. Like that was, and if college could get me there, I was like, okay, maybe I could do that. But I really did think, all right, if I can get a job after I graduate, then maybe I will just go and work. So graduate school was never anything that was in my mind. But when I got to high school and started coaching my high school, well, I was in high school, I was doing a lot of sports, and then after I graduated, I had started coaching, and there were just several things that suggested to me that maybe one of the things that I wanted to do was to become a teacher. I mean, I could have went and worked out in the oil fields. I could have gone and gotten a job in construction. There's several different kinds of things that were available to me at the time that I graduated. But no, there was something, like something told me, no, there's more to this than just going to work. I can always go and take up one of these jobs, but I don't know how many opportunities I will have to go to college. I felt academically like I could do it. I had done well enough in high school. And so, yeah, I graduated high school, went to college, and I spent 7 years as an undergraduate and only 6 as a graduate student. I still am the only person to this day I know who spent more time as an undergrad than a graduate student. But across those 7 years, there was almost never any kind of imagining in my mind that there was something beyond the experience I was having as an undergrad. I thought, this is it. And I had lined things up in a way that were going to get me into the thing it is that I wanted to do. So I had talked to people at my high school. This is South Bakersfield High School in Central California. Had talked to them. I was studying math at the time, and so there were going to be openings in the math department. And I mean, there wasn't some written agreement. I was still going to have to interview for these jobs, but sort of understood that I would apply and be a very strong candidate for these jobs. I was already coaching sports teams at my high school, and I really just thought that that was going to be my life. And I was very happy with that as the prospect for my life. I have several of my siblings who live, I come from a big family, so I have several siblings who live in Bakersfield. My parents live there now and had been living there at the time. So I just thought, yeah, this will be great. I will be able to have family around. I will get married. I will raise kids. I have my core group of friends here. All of this seems to have lined up kind of perfectly for me. So yeah, it wasn't in my mind at all that I was going to go to graduate school. Yeah.
Let's go back a little bit. What sport are we talking about?
Well, I did several sports when I was in high school, but the one that I coached was my high school wrestling team. So
wrestling.
Yeah.
Okay.
And my best friend and I were both wrestlers, and he actually right now is coaching a wrestling team in Tennessee where he lives. But it was a real passion of ours, and certainly it's one of the most challenging sports that you can imagine, in part because you are totally responsible for yourself. You're on a team, but you only ever perform 1v1 against another human being. And so it requires a lot of concentration and intensity and dedication. It was one of the hardest things that I had done, but I was also happy to work with the coaches who had coached me to become a part of that team and to help them out in the years that I was able to afterward. But yeah, wrestling was that thing.
So if you had gone the professional route, that would have been the sport.
Probably not wrestling, because there's not a league of professional wrestling that isn't like the televised WWE wrestling, which I have to say out loud is not a real professional sport. It is a real athletic competition, to be sure. Those people are incredibly gifted athletes and work very hard at what they do. But there's a performative aspect to it. It's staged, and so it's not the same thing. And that was not the wrestling that I was interested in. So outside of trying to become an Olympian, there's not really a professional wrestling league. There's college, and then that's it. So I was actually working to become a professional football player, and so too was my best friend. And of course, it didn't pan out, and probably for the better, considering things that we've learned since then, and how I'm able to age into my 4th decade of life in ways that are like physically, good for me. But yeah, that was so football was the direction that I wanted to go professionally, even though I was coaching wrestling, and that was probably my best sport.
Interesting. Are there any skills from the wrestling that help you in football?
If you are a defender on a football team, being a wrestler is actually super helpful for figuring out how to tackle people. And for somebody who is on the smaller side of what you're expected to be when you are a football player at pretty much any level, knowing how to tackle people using things like leveraging your body, it matters a lot, because the simple laws of physics would tell you that somebody who's 6'8" and 340 pounds is just going to run right over me. But there are ways that wrestling teaches you to use your body, to leverage portions of your body in order to take somebody down like that doesn't defy physics, but it changes things in a way where the physics can work in your favor. So wrestling, I could not have been a professional football player if I wasn't a good wrestler, because there just would be no way to make that happen.
I'm just picturing in the movies when you see like the vision of someone through like a computer, no, not computer, like you see, I don't even know how to describe it, but you see like the screen and the numbers, like your view is calculating. So you see this big guy, and then your mind as a wrestler is calculating the weight, the size, and then the weak points, so you can just tackle him.
Yeah, it kind of works that way. I mean, maybe numbers aren't popping out of the middle of my eyes in the way they would on a screen, but there are wheels turning in your head when you're getting ready to run into somebody like that, and you have to be thinking, okay, where can I place my shoulder? Where can I make sure that my head is safe? Where can I make sure that I can upend him? Is my center of gravity lower than his? So there's all kinds of things that are in there, and you internalize them. You practice them so much that you internalize them, and you think about them in a split second. But it probably seems strange if you're not accustomed to doing that, to watch it happen in real time, because it has to happen quicker. And the higher the levels are that you get, going all the way up to the professional level, the quicker you have to be able to process that, because otherwise you can get really hurt. And I certainly did not want that.
No, you wouldn't be talking today at me. Okay, so when the idea of maybe becoming a teacher, when you had that idea, why a teacher?
I can't identify a single moment where it just dawned on me that I wanted to be a teacher, but I will say that I had several great teachers over the course of my K through 12 experience that I think helped me figure out that being a teacher would, one, utilize skills that I had been trying to practice, like being more empathetic and helping people to learn and discover new things about themselves. But also just being there for people when they need somebody in their life outside of their home to anchor them in a bigger world, a bigger social world. I mean, I'll share with you, for example, the elementary school that I went to was actually in Northern California, and I can't remember the exact details of the demographics in this town. It's Sonora, California. But when I lived there, I was for sure the only person of color that I'd seen in this entire town. And this includes my family. I have 7 siblings, and all of them are white. My mom is white. My stepfathers, all of them have been white. And my biological father, who I've never met, is where I get the melanin in my skin. And so I was in a space where I was loved by my family, certainly, but outside of our household, I was a literal black sheep. And it was, it created a lot of tension when I was at school, because a lot of the young people that I went to school with, not all, but a lot of them, had internalized things from their parents. I imagine, I don't know exactly where all the messages came from, but it was largely about like, hey, how can we make this person's life miserable? So there were several groups of almost exclusively young boys who went out of their way to try to make life miserable for me because I was a person of color. This included, regular things like taking my lunch every day, beating me up, pushing me down, fighting me, throwing rocks at me, calling me a whole bunch of racial epithets, and never just allowing me to be me. And I had some people who I went to elementary school with who were friendly to me, but I think were often worried about being friends with me because it'd be a guilt by association. And so even though I had some people who were friendly to me, I never really had a group of friends who would have stood up for me in a moment like that. So a lot of it felt like me being alone. And I remember specifically one day, my mother, who at this time had not gone to nursing school, as she had split from my younger sibling's father, and was working a job as a receptionist at a chiropractic office. We had very little money, and she had worked very hard. And she bought me something that just made me feel really good about myself. There was these Jell-O pudding cups, and it had a layer of chocolate and then a layer of vanilla and a layer of chocolate, and you got them in a little 4-pack. And I'd always looked at them at the store, and I knew that we were poor, so I never asked my mom for anything like that, but she knew that I wanted it. And so she went out on a limb and bought that for me after a particularly trying time that I'd had on the bus, when a bus ride home, and some kids were picking on me. And I didn't even know that she had bought it. She had snuck it into my lunch. So when I opened it up and I was sitting in the grass by myself, I opened it up and I had this pudding cup and I was so excited. And this kid and his cronies who often picked on me came over. They did it almost every day. They came over, saw my pudding cup, and pinned me down, took my lunch, and this one kid in particular ripped open the lid, and he said, "N-words don't deserve pudding," and he spit into the pudding, and then they put it back down on the grass, and that was it. So I cried, of course, and was really upset. And when we went back into class, my teacher saw that I was crying, so she asked me to stick around after school, and I was very hesitant to share with her what had happened because I didn't know whether or not she would be, how exactly she would respond. But I shared with her little bits of information, and after doing that, I mean, she started to cry herself and just said, "I'll tell you what, tomorrow, why don't you come and sit in my classroom and have lunch with me?" I said, "Okay." So I did that, and of course, it was just her and I. And she didn't do it that next day, but I think it was a couple of days later when I came in to have lunch with her, she had gotten me a Jello pudding cup.
The same one, the same time?
Same one. And it was incredibly sweet. And so I ended up, it wasn't every day, but most every day I ended up spending time eating lunch in this classroom with my teacher. And so a shout out to Miss Mayo, wherever you are, right? She was my second grade teacher who did this for me. And it was this really humanizing thing. And I don't know, I think back on moments like that and go, not maybe, that has to be why I wanted to become a teacher. Like, I want to be able to do those sorts of things for other people. And I had a teacher who was there at a really trying moment in my childhood to help me through that. And I don't know, sort of what more could I ask for in a job that I want to do? So it's probably no coincidence that I wanted to become a teacher and now find myself one just at the level of college. But Miss Mayo was great, but she certainly wasn't the only one. I know that after that, Miss Walsh, my third grade teacher, Miss Harden, my fourth grade teacher, like, they were incredibly kind to me. And it felt like, yeah, if I want to be kind to people in the world, this job provides me the opportunity. Which seems to go like to run counter to what wrestling and football are about. Like, that's not about helping anybody in particular, but yeah, the teachers that I had were amazing, and that wasn't true for every teacher. I had a couple really terrible ones, especially when I was in high school, but for the most part I had a series of really wonderful teachers who helped me learn a lot of great things. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that once you were in college, you were interested in math. Were you planning on becoming a math teacher, or why math?
Yeah, so it turns out, of all things, I'm actually a lot better at math than I am at anything else academically. And I can't explain this. When I graduated high school, I actually started at ITT Technical Institute. I started in a welding program, and was very excited for that. And when I left that program is when I started studying math. And I wasn't especially good at math in high school. I was okay, but it was after I graduated high school where I found out that I was actually better at math. It started coming much more naturally to me. So yeah, I thought that I was going to teach high school math, and was taking courses to follow up on that. And just, I found them, I was not quite as interested in the courses as I needed to be. And this is true of, I don't know, basic courses like algebra, but even more advanced courses that I had gotten into. And I mean, they're totally great. And now that I'm not in them, I can look at them and say, oh yeah, like, this is wonderful. And I can encourage students who are thinking about math as a potential major, yes, you should do that. And there are all these great things. But at the time that I was in it, something about it didn't feel right. So I knew I could do it. I knew I could get through a degree program, and that would lead me to being a math teacher. But that wasn't that, yeah, just the fit didn't feel exactly right. So I ended up changing my major several times, which is part of the reason I spent 7 years as an undergrad. But yeah, that was math. I think math, because it was the thing that I thought I was best at when I graduated, was the thing that I wanted to lean into. And yeah, and so that was where I started.
So we're kind of understanding your process or your journey before we get to and then you decided to go to grad school. So I still have questions.
Okay.
So give us an example of what were the other majors that you decided to change during college. So it was math, and then
I think after math, I was really interested in political science. And
Mhm.
how that came about is this is going, way back in the day when you would actually have to walk into an admissions office and pull out these catalogs where they would tell you what sorts of jobs you could apply for and what the average annual salary was for that and expectations and whatnot. Now all that stuff is posted online and you can find it almost anywhere. But I was in an admissions office just trying to figure out what direction I wanted to go because I knew math wasn't for me. And I read about lobbyists.
Oh.
Oh, lobbyists. Well, I haven't really heard this term. What do they do? And it turned out you can make a lot of money as a lobbyist, and you can be in Washington D.C. and all these other things. And I thought, oh, this sounds really interesting. So I thought, let me take some political science courses and see how those go. So I entertained that for a while. And one of the things that I was encouraged to do by a professor in one of my political science classes was to take language courses, because if you want to work in politics, you generally have to be able to connect people outside of the US. And so what courses would I want to take? And I thought, oh, I don't know, maybe Russian or Mandarin would be interesting languages to take. So it kicked up an interest in languages. And I didn't switch my major to language, but I thought, okay, these are things that I'm going to explore. And it just so happened that around the time that I was thinking about this, I started taking a Japanese course that was offered at the community college that I was at. And it was a random circumstance where this professor who had come, I cannot remember specifically where she had come from in Japan, but her name was Professor Sakamaki-san. And she was offering introductory level Japanese courses. So I took the 2 introductory level Japanese courses, and I took every available course that I could after that. I think I took 5 in total. And there was a cohort of us who took all of those same classes. I think maybe 7 or 8 of us. There were a couple of other people who were sort of in and out, but it was that core group. And it was an amazing experience, so much so that actually in 2 weeks, I'm taking my own kids to Tokyo. We're going to go spend 10 days there and just immerse ourselves as much as we can in the culture. But yes, that fueled my interest in language and exploring more of those kinds of things. So that was another interest. And then through a random circumstance, I ended up in an English class that went absolutely terribly. And I had to retake that English class, and I took it with what probably was the best English professor I've had in my entire college experience. And when I say best, I mean the kindest, most thoughtful, but also the most rewarding experience that I had had, because this is a person that basically ignited a love of studying literature inside of me, which I didn't think was there, because I was the person who's like, no, the curtains are blue, it doesn't mean anything else. And he helped me to figure out how there are ways of reading that are really personally rewarding. And that was the point at which I said, okay, this is something else that I can do. But I still wasn't thinking about graduate school. I thought, well, I could become an English teacher. And I actually had a conversation with people at South Bakersfield High to say, I'm switching out of math. I'm thinking English is the thing for me, and I'm just wondering if that's going to complicate things. And they said, we'll still invite you to apply for the job, everything else, but we'd still love to have you on the teaching faculty here if English is the route that you want to go. So it was a switch, but it still wasn't a switch that was pointing me in the direction of graduate school.
How many times did you change your major?
Well, I never officially changed my major. I sort of just stopped being. What's that?
You just consider different.
Yeah, I just considered different possibilities. And I was spending a lot of time at a community college where you're not required to declare a major. So 5 years of my experience was at 3 different community colleges. When I got to Cal State Bakersfield, which is where I graduated with my undergrad degree, I had declared an English major going into that, but it was in my last semester at Bakersfield Community College, the same town, but the junior college, where I had that experience with that teacher that convinced me English is the thing to do. So I'm going to complete this class and then study that when I go to Cal State Bakersfield.
Before we explore that class, because I'm very curious about that teacher and your experience, all these years that you spent in college were because, were you working at the time? Were you combining study and work, and you were taking just few classes at a time, or what made it so long?
Well, so two parts of that. What made it so long is that I describe myself as a first generation college student, even though my mom had those nursing courses. Uh, as a first generation college student, I didn't know how to ask questions. I stepped into life in college assuming falsely that everybody who was there knew the answer to every question that I was thinking, and I was too afraid to ask anybody for help on anything. And I had assumed if I'm here, I should know what to do. In light of that, did, I had fewer questions that I could ask my mother that she would be able to answer because she had a different college experience.
Mhm.
And there wasn't anybody else. I mean, my friends who did attend college, I mean, the three who attended college with me ended up dropping out not long after we had started for very understandable reasons. They all have great jobs and just needed to go in a different direction. But yeah, I just was floundering. I kept moving between things. I took a lot of classes that at the time felt unnecessary, even though now that I look at it, there's no unnecessary knowledge. Like I got a lot of things out of that. But it felt like, oh, I'm not moving in a forward direction. I'm just sort of spinning around in circles. Yeah, and I was also working full time. I worked full time the entirety of the time that I was in undergrad. The seventh year that I was in undergrad, I actually was a substitute teacher. And that was the first time that I didn't have a full-time job that required me to work 5 8-hour days at least. I spent most of that time working at a Walmart store in Bakersfield and at a Sam's Club store when I lived in Southern California.
Doing what?
Oh, when I worked for the Sam's Club, I did several different kinds of jobs, but it was primarily like front end cash register stuff, and then also like helping to unpack merchandise as was brought onto the sales floor. And then when I worked at Walmart, which I will say was an experience, and mostly not a good one. I tried to do just about everything. So I unloaded trucks. I worked the overnight shift, which is how I started there for I think about a year and a half. I did some merchandise ordering. I helped carry out furniture. One of the only things I didn't do was work as a cashier or in the front end with any of the money related things. It was always just across the floor, whatever it is that I could do. But I learned how to mix paint and how to sell ammunition and fishing licenses and all kinds of stuff.
Lots of skills. Okay, so what made you not give up? Because 7 years, or did you at some point during those 7 years, did you consider just giving up and trying a different thing for your life?
I did several times. And usually the times that I wanted to quit would be, say, after a really long shift at Walmart. So this is after I worked the overnight shift, I got switched onto an evening shift, which meant that I worked from 2 to 11. And I had to take all of my classes before that. And I would ask to take a 2-hour break so that way I could go and coach my wrestling team, right? So I sandwiched all these things in there. And so I would get home at maybe 11:15, 11:20. I would make myself something quick to eat, and I would think, okay, I've got this homework to do. Let me do that. And there were several nights where I just thought, I don't want to do this homework, right? I don't want to think through this political theory, or I don't want to read this book. And it usually wasn't because I didn't enjoy it, it's because I didn't have the energy to do it. But I would think about the experiences that I just had working that shift at Walmart, and I would say, okay, so if I don't do this homework, if I don't finish this thing, if I don't write this essay, if I don't revise this thing I've been given an opportunity to revise, I can drop out of school, which would be a possibility. I don't think anybody would judge me for it. And I could continue doing this kind of work at Walmart until I could find a way to, I don't know, become part of the assistant manager program or something like that. But there was nothing, absolutely nothing about that job that made me want to stay there and do that. And in fact, because I disliked so much of what it is that I did, I kept thinking, okay, it's hard to do the things it is that my professors are asking me to do, but it's not as hard as stocking toilet paper on a shelf at 10 p.m. It's not as hard as breaking up fights on Black Friday between customers who are fighting over television. Like there are all these things that were much harder about working at Walmart, which is why I mean, my hat's off to anybody who does that work and does it for the entirety of a career or loves it. I mean, kudos to them. That was work. It was a little too hard for me. And I thought, okay, I could quit college, but I'd rather do this thing, and I can see some light at the end of the tunnel. Yes, it's a very long tunnel. It's a 7-year long tunnel, but there is some light at the end of it that I want to get to. And I think it helped too that I had had conversations with people at my high school who had said, yeah, like there's a real possibility you could get the job here. So I could actually see what it looked like on the other end. So I might have been spinning my wheels and I didn't know exactly what direction to head, but there was some futurity to college that I could process.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how your work experience made it very clear to you that this is not the path that you would like for you. So now let's go to this wonderful experience you had with this English teacher. What made it so wonderful?
Mm-hmm. I've thought about this also for years, and I've told a few of my friends, about this professor, and I want to make sure that I'm being totally fair, because taking his class came after taking what was the worst class I had ever taken and the worst teaching experience, or the worst learning experience I had had in any context. And just to fill you in, so when I moved from Southern California back to Bakersfield, and I moved from Palomar Community College to Bakersfield Community College, you're required to take a placement exam, so that way they can figure out what English and math courses you should be in if you don't already have credits that you can transfer. So I took my English placement exam and tested into, I think it was English 2, which was sort of the highest course that you could take. But I hadn't taken an English course in a long time. So I said, I'm going to take English 1A. There's 1A, 1B, and then 2. So I'll take English 1A, I'll get an easy A on it, and it will be a nice, like opportunity just to build on that. And then when I transfer to Cal State, no big deal. And the class that I was taking was taught by a professor who, through rumors, we learned was somebody who had lost their tenure, I think at USC or some big place, and now found himself teaching at a community college where he was not happy about being there teaching. And if I recall correctly, I think what he had told us at the start of that semester, because he was pretty generous. I think there were 25 seats in the class, and he let 5 additional students come in. Mm-hmm. And he said something to the effect of, I'm just letting all of you know that there are 30 of you here in the class at the start of the semester, and I'd be surprised if half of you are still here by the end. And he said, look to your left and look to your right. One of those 2 people you just looked at is going to be gone, and it's quite possible you're the person who's going to be gone because you won't make it through this class. It wasn't the first time I had heard something like that, but it was the first time I'd heard somebody say it in quite that way. And it made me a little bit nervous, but it also made me think, all right, I'm an athlete, I'm a hard worker, I've gone through hard things before, I can do this class. But it turns out he was right. Fewer than half the students were there to take the final exam. I think there were maybe 8 of us, if I recall correctly, that were there to take the final exam. And he had assigned some incredibly challenging assignments. He had failed me for both of them. I actually took my assignments to the chair of the department to ask her if she could just look at them, not the ones with the comments on them. I printed blank copies because I thought that I had been graded unfairly, and she had agreed with that. And so when I failed the final exam and shared that with her, we had a conversation with this professor, and he was not happy about being called in, but she basically told him, hey, you need to actually reassess the work that's been submitted, because just on the quality of writing alone, this is a passable assignment. She didn't say I would give it an A or B. She said it's a passable assignment. It doesn't deserve a failing grade. And so he took those assignments, reassessed them all, gave me D pluses on all of them to give me a D plus for the class, and had written a note at the bottom of my essay that said something like, this is just, you don't deserve this grade, but I'm giving it to you just so that way I don't have to see your face again next semester.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
so I was crushed. I was just absolutely crushed. But I knew, because I was thinking, I've tested above this class, why can't I pass this class, which is not at the same level? And so I had doubted my abilities as a student, and just was really, really shaken. My confidence was really shaken there. And that is a moment, that's probably the closest I ever came to dropping out of college, was hearing somebody tell me that, because I didn't feel like I belonged, and I didn't have parents that I could lean into to ask for advice there. So the next semester, I retook that same class, but with a different professor at the recommendation of the chair.
Mhm.
And the person that I took it with, his name was Sam. I cannot remember his last name for the life of me, but he was a graduate student at Cal State who was given the opportunity to teach this class. And I stepped into that class and I was nervous. I remember sweating the first day, just thinking, okay, how terrible will this be? Because English isn't my thing. And I was actually determined at that point, I'm just going to get this class over with so that way I can transfer. I will never have anything to do with English again.
Mhm.
And we were reading a poem called The Albatross, is one of the first things that we had read. And I remember him asking a question, and it was a kind of difficult question, and nobody was raising their hand. And he pointed to me and he said, "Can you share your name with me again?" I said, "I'm Derek." And he said, "Okay, like this is an image in here. Can you tell me what does this image mean to you?" I was like, I really don't know. And he's like, "No, look, it's okay. Just what is the first like feeling or impression you have when you hear these words together?" And
Mhm.
so I was thinking in my head, I'm just going to make something up, but I said something about like it makes me feel kind of breezy and light because it's a poem about the sea and whatnot. It makes me feel breezy and kind of light, and I don't know, maybe like it moves a little bit. And the look on his face when I said that was just oh, that is amazing. And yes, we can think about just that feeling inside of our bodies of light. That's something that I felt before too. And the way that he spoke to me was very like kind and humanizing,
Mhm.
and made me feel validated in what it is that I had said. And I knew that I had half-assed that answer. Oh, I don't know if I can say that, but I
Yes.
I had not given my best possible answer or full effort in it. And I was just thinking, well, what if I did try a little bit harder next time?
Mhm.
And so I wasn't the only person in the class who spoke up. He was like this with everybody in the class, but it was
Mhm.
just this beautiful. He was a beautiful conduit for connecting all of our voices, and not that he remembered all of our names right off the bat, but when he couldn't remember a name or if he didn't know, he would always before you speak, can you remind us of your name? And so he was helping us to feel connected because then I could say, oh well, when Angelica said this is what
Mhm.
I was thinking, and it just became really connective, and it was a dramatically different experience. And even when it came to the writing portion, I remember being nervous about writing anything for that class. And Sam had offered some wonderful and thoughtful feedback on what I had written. And he talked about the structures of my sentences and was very thoughtful about things that I wasn't doing well, but not
Mhm.
making me feel bad about it and saying, look, you're doing this thing, which is actually making it more challenging for me to follow your meaning. And it stands out to me because you don't do this in other parts. Your sentences are so clear here. Why is it muddled here? And it got me thinking about, yeah, why is it muddled there? Right. It wasn't, oh, you're terrible and I don't want to see you in my class again. It was,
Mhm.
I want to experience more of this eloquence that you've given us here. So yeah, I think on its own, if that had been the first class, the first English 1A class I had taken, it would have been its own wonderful thing. But I think it feels especially um,
Mhm.
important and valuable and honestly life altering for me because it came in the wake of what was an incredibly terrible experience. And so just to have somebody who was that kind, that reminded me in several ways of Miss Mayo, my second grade teacher, who just demonstrated a kindness to me that she didn't have to demonstrate. And I think Sam demonstrated a kindness to me that he didn't have to demonstrate. And for that reason, I was incredibly grateful. And that made me think, okay, there's something to this. And I also realized that I was engaged in that class in a way I'd never been in any math class that I had taken. It was challenging. I was not good at it, but I was interested in it. And I thought, okay, I'm exploring things that are, he's just asking me questions about myself. And math, I think, can do that in a different way.
Mhm.
But the way that it was happening in my English classes just felt more natural. And I thought, this is something that I want to try. And I can become my high school's English teacher if I follow this path.
So then you finished college, and what are you thinking about your future?
I had finished college. I had already before I graduated. This is the year before I graduated, or maybe slightly more than a year before. I had a faculty mentor who had told me, his name is Emerson Case. I think he's still there at Cal State Bakersfield, but he
Mhm.
had told me you should consider applying to graduate school. I was a McNair scholar, and so he said, as a McNair scholar, you will get your application fees paid for and everything else. So you should apply for graduate programs because even if you're just going to become a teacher, he was convinced I should do something beyond high school teaching. He said, even if you're just going to become a teacher, having that master's degree on hand means that you'll step into the job with a higher rate of pay. And you're a math guy, so think about what your lifetime earnings are going to be above that. if you spend a year or two doing this thing. And the logic of that made a lot of sense to me. So I said, okay, I will apply for master's programs. And he pushed me to apply for some PhD programs. So I applied for the University of Oregon, the University of Arizona, some other Pac-12 schools, and just fully didn't expect to get in. And true to form, I didn't get into any of them. I got rejections from all, I think, except from the University of Oregon that said, we can only provide you like a $5,000 stipend with tuition remission, but I couldn't figure out a way to afford to live there and do all of that. So I was, of course, dejected and feeling really down on that. But through the McNair program, I had gone to the University of Arizona just for a campus visit because they would cover one or two campus visits. So I went there, met with a whole bunch of people, including the director of graduate studies, Meg Loda Brown. And so she had called me up after I had been, in their program, I had been waitlisted, actually. So I wasn't fully rejected, but was waitlisted. And that was, a little disconcerting because I still thought, okay, what are the chances I'm actually going to get in? I don't know where I'm at on this wait list or how long it is. But she called me up to say that she had advocated for me to get into the graduate program because I had this experience of meeting with her. So when I graduated, I knew that I was going to go to the University of Arizona for the graduate program, but I didn't find that out.
In what area?
Yeah, so I went into, I actually entered their MAT program, so Master of Arts in Teaching program. Okay. I did not get accepted into the PhD program, which I kind of had my fingers crossed would happen just because I wanted to be able to say that I did it. I didn't expect, even at that point, that I was going to get a PhD. I thought I'm going to get this master's degree and go teach. Yeah, but I found that out in April and I graduated in June. So there wasn't a whole lot of time while I was an undergrad that I knew that I would go to graduate school. But really, it was just thinking, how can I up my pay scale when I take on this job, when I apply for it? And it will make me, having the master's degree might make me more marketable as an applicant for a job at my high school. So that it was all still geared toward that.
And so you entered the program, and what happened?
Random things. So because I was in the MAT program, and there was one other person for whom this was true, we were still invited to be part of the, they have colloquia for first-year students to help them figure out the life of a graduate student. So there were two of us who were on that MAT track, but the rest were all in the PhD program. And I think there were 13 other people in that PhD program. So I just paid as much attention as I could. And I was like, okay, let me get the most out of this as possible. And for myself and this other person who were in the MAT program, we were on a different timeline because we only had 2 years of funding as opposed to the 7 years that you had if you were in the PhD program. So I had to take more classes than most of my peers. I took 3 graduate courses instead of 2. I took 3, 3, and 3 in back-to-back semesters, and then had to prepare for either a master's examination or a master's thesis. And because I was nervous about my writing for several reasons, I opted to go with the examination instead. And that meant it was a lot of pressure, a lot of trying to figure out how to be a graduate student plus by virtue of taking the extra class. And because I wasn't in the PhD program, it meant that I wasn't extended a graduate teaching assistantship that all of my peers were, where they were teaching usually one section of their own intro to writing course, or there was a 2-semester sequence of that at Arizona. So I had been directed to an associate dean who ran what was called the University College, which is like a gen ed program there. And she said, we have these courses that we teach that are actually designed specifically for student athletes. The schedule is designed in a way that student athletes can take this course. It meets once a week for 3.5 hours, usually in the evening after practices are done. And it covers things that you might be interested in. Every week it takes up a new issue of identity. So one week it's focused on race, one on gender, one on orientation, one on religion. And you give students short readings, and then you have them talk through those short readings together, and then they do these book projects for the last 4 weeks. And I thought, this sounds amazing. And they brought me on, I think my title was technically writing specialist. So I was assigned to grade all of the writing out of there. And it was a teaching experience. It was a co-teaching experience. You had at least one other person you facilitated the class with. And it was fantastic. I it never felt like entirely my own course because it was designed at, you know, the level of a dean, actually at the level of a provost, and then was administered by several different people who were in my position. But it meant that I got to connect with student athletes, which mattered to me. I was very excited to work with those groups. It meant that I could focus on topics that I had taken a recent interest in after majoring in English, because I found that these are things that I did want to explore and learn more about. And aside from grading all of the writing, because I think there were 30 some odd students in these sections, and a couple of times I was teaching more than one, it gave me an opportunity to figure out, yeah, how do you assess somebody's writing? How do you help them to work through things mechanically in writing that they're treating primarily as informal? So how do you make sure that you don't edit out their voice in a written assignment? So there were opportunities there to do some of the teaching that I had desired and had applied for. And I still, some part of me still at that point was thinking, I need to be able to do this because when I go work at this high school, I'm going to have to be able to do this for my high school students. Yeah, so that was it. It was there was a lot of pressure to get through that MAT program, and then several of the people who were in my cohorts, including two who were in a cohort that had arrived before I did, were advocating for me to get into the PhD program, and it said, I don't know why Derek's not a part of this, and we should just graduate him into the program. But I it's like, well, I don't know if they still want me. I don't know if I'm a good enough student. But I said, I had told myself, this is after a conversation with my mom, I don't know whether or not I will ever have another opportunity to just apply for a PhD program. Like, I'm in a place where these people know me, and maybe they reject me, and that feels like a huge risk to take because I don't want to be rejected by these people that I admire and respect. But I mean, it might be so much harder 10 years down the road if I decided to do this just to see if I get a PhD. Let me just apply and see what happens. And I had fully thought that I was going to be rejected. And then I was awarded a GAT-ship and accepted into the PhD program. And I couldn't believe it. And I was very shocked that it had happened. Yeah, but because I had spent the 2 years trying to work through the MAT program, I was actually now, in terms of coursework, slightly ahead of where some of the other students were who had come in the same cohort. And that meant that I left in 6 years rather than 7. So I was a little bit ahead in that regard, but that's only because I thought that I was leaving.
How was the PhD program called?
So it was a PhD program in literature, English literature, I think, in fact. But that's one of 5 programs that were part of the English department there. So you could be in the literature program like I was in, or creative writing, rhetoric, composition and the teaching of English, English language and linguistics, and second language acquisition and teaching. So those 5 programs were all one department. And that meant that I also had a lot of opportunities to work with students who were doing different kinds of projects. And that let me figure out different ways that you could even teach. So seeing how somebody who does second language acquisition and teaching teaches is it's phenomenal, and helped me to figure out things about the assumptions that I make about the words that I use when I teach. So yeah, there were a lot of great opportunities that came from being part of such a large group, even if that meant logistical complications and other kinds of ways.
So in that, in the years that you were doing the master's, and then kind of thinking of, well, I'm going to apply for the PhD, at what point were you now giving up the idea of going back to the high school and teach?
Well, you are married to an academic, so you probably remember some portion of this, that there's always that doubt in your mind, even when you're in a PhD program, that you're not going to get an academic job, a tenure track job at some academic institution. And I recall that a lot of my friends, because I made a lot of really wonderful friendships while I was there. And several of those people were really worried about not being able to survive the job market. That's how we talked about it. You got to survive the job market. And there are always more PhDs produced than there are PhD jobs available and for the tenure track. And so we'd have these running jokes about what we were going to do. And I was like, oh, I can always return to Walmart or whatever else. But I did also know that I had this opportunity to go and teach. Now, whether or not they would have held on to that position, I was confident that even if it wasn't at South Bakersfield High School, there was always the opportunity for me to return to teach there. And I felt, I've gotten into a PhD program. They're going to want me. Like I can apply and be a really strong candidate for any of the jobs back in Bakersfield. But there was something about being in the PhD program. I knew I'd have to write a dissertation. I knew I'd have to finish all of that. And I had convinced myself at that point, once I got accepted into the program, I said, there's no way I'm not finishing this program. Like, even if I go back, I'm going to finish this program because I've been given an opportunity that nobody in my family has ever had. And let me follow through on that. And there were other kinds of expectations that were wrapped up in that by virtue of being a person of color and what that meant for the students that I was working with and wanting to be a good example for them. Like, I knew I was going to do it, but I still kept thinking, all right, I won't put all my eggs into that basket. I can always return home. I can always go do this thing. And so in 2011, a couple of my friends in the program and I decided we were going to go to the MLA convention, which is where the initial interviews happen when you're applying for jobs. And there were several panels that we wanted to see, but we really wanted to get a sense of what is the job market like? What is it like to apply for jobs? And it was honestly terrible and frightening. And I felt so bad for everybody who was there and who was applying. And it just seemed really hectic. And I talked to people just to get a sense of what they were doing. And several people had been on the market for more than 3 years. Like, there's the fourth or fifth job cycle that they were applying for something. And it felt kind of dispiriting and soul crushing. And not every story went exactly that way, but there were enough of them that made it feel like, oh, the things we've been joking about, there's something behind that, right? So we all left there feeling like, okay, well, let's every one of us figure out, we're gonna work as baristas, we're gonna serve food in restaurants, whatever else, and so that intensified a bit. But then in the next
wait, what does MLA? Were those the initials? What does
so
that
that's the
stand
Modern
for?
Language Association. It's the
Okay.
big convention for any language program of study. So this would be true for people who are studying Spanish or Italian, English. It all sort of gets lumped together in the Modern Languages Association. And and it's a conference that they hold every year. They usually rotate locations, I think, between East Coast and West Coast.
Okay.
Try to be fair and equitable. So I'd gone back, and at that point I was the only coursework I had left. I have a PhD minor in gender and women's studies, so I was wrapping up coursework for that. And I was putting together my committee for my dissertation, feeling pretty good about that. But I thought, okay, I still have this year and then next year to finish the dissertation and apply for jobs. So I'm going to do a trial run. I'm going to go on the market this year. All I have at this point is 10 pages of the intro to my dissertation written. I don't have anything else done. But I'm going to turn that into a writing sample. I'm going to send it out there, and I just want to see if I get feedback. If I can get an interview, that would be great. So that way I have some practice for when I go on the market for real the following year. And sure enough, I sent out, I want to say 40 some odd applications, and it was expensive. And I questioned whether or not I should send out that many, but I thought casting a wide net means I'll likely get at least some feedback either on an application packet, or if I could get at least one interview, I think the money's worth it, the practice that will give me for stepping into the cycle the next time around. And I got a call back from Claire Gleitman, who's now the dean of H&S here at Ithaca College, but at the time was the chair of the English department. She requested more materials, and I was like, oh, this is a great first step. I got a request. That means, and I think in sending the additional materials, I had sent her an email saying, if it's not too much to ask for, I would love just to hear any feedback you have on my application packet. I didn't hear anything for a couple of weeks. And so I was really worried that I'd overstep my bounds in asking for that. But from her and Colgate University were the only two places I had heard back from. And so I was really worried. I was thinking, okay, well, I didn't get the practice interview that I wanted, but that's fine. So let me just rededicate my efforts to my dissertation. And then I got an email from her saying that they wanted to interview me at MLA. And the interview apparently went well enough that they invited me for a campus visit. And I thought, this is great because the campus visit will be an opportunity for me to practice that. I didn't even think I'd have an opportunity, but let me practice that just to see how it goes. And I did well enough at the campus visit that they extended me the job. And so with less than one full chapter of my dissertation written, I had an opportunity to take a tenure track job at a place I loved what I had learned about Ithaca College and putting my application packet together, but really had I had not thought it would be possible for me to be here. Again, I thought, all right, all of this is for practice and we'll see what happens next year. And now here I am. And
can you
saying
see
yes to graduate school made this possible.
see how how interesting is to see all your struggles about the different stages in your education, all the difficulties that you went through, and then the last part, it was just like a breeze.
Yeah, just like the poem, like Sam told me in the poem, it was just a breeze. I mean, it really is. It seems incredibly fortuitous to me. I think anybody who has a job like this, in some ways, is lucky, right? Because you can't control all the variables, and there are a lot of hardworking people who never have the good fortune to interview for a position like I got, right? So it's acknowledging that, to be sure. I don't know what percentage it feels like 50% or more is just fortune and circumstance. But for what I could control, I feel also wonderfully lucky that I had gone through so many really terrible teaching experiences and struggles, that I felt prepared for the things that graduate school threw at me. I had to learn a lot about how to become a better writer, for sure.
Mhm.
But once I had gotten there, I really had an opportunity to lean into the teaching, to lean into the new things I was learning through gender and women's studies. I became one of the co-presidents for the English Graduate Union and served in that role for 3 years. So I got to work through some things around leadership and figure out how do you advocate for people who largely are exploited financially, right, as a collection of folks. And yeah, all of that work, everything that we put in, all of the job workshops that I attended and whatnot. And then in the end, when I was not expecting it at all, is when, yeah, it was just with a relative ease. I mean, it was difficult, yes, but with a relative ease, I think in comparison to what other people go through, I ended up getting this job offer. And it's like, there's no way I can turn this down. And I wouldn't have wanted to. I was very excited to be able to come to Ithaca College, and for all of the schools that I had applied to for that cycle, Ithaca College was top 3 for schools that I wanted to be at.
Very nice. Before we get to the no, because now we've been talking for an hour and I promise an hour, give me a few minutes. So before we get to the no, I'm just curious now to see how you have integrated the sports experience, so the wrestling and football, your personal experience with this horrible professor, and then the wonderful one, all the things you learn in now the way you teach at Ithaca College. How do you put all that together?
It's a challenge to put it all together in every single moment. So I think it comes together in unique ways in the various things that I do. So in the middle of a classroom, trying to be that conduit that I was talking about, that Sam had been for us, the connective conduit, things that I organize my own class around. So I spend a lot of time doing community building in the space of my classes. So that way, when we go to talk about issues that are contentious or controversial, we feel much more confident in sharing with one another, because I'm speaking to Lucia as opposed to just a nameless face in the room, or I'm building off of something that Carlos just said, that and I know his name, so I know how to address him directly, and I'm willing to address him directly because I know his name. Stuff like that has been really helpful in trying to build a sense of community in the space of my classroom. And I'm not sure how well I do it, but I'm always trying to do it well. And I tell all my students that on the first day of class, everybody will, by the end of the semester, to get a passing grade, everybody will have to be able to name everybody in the room. And I'll start. Yeah. And at the end of the first class, I will go through and name every student after they've introduced themselves. And with the exception of the fall semester of 2021, in my Ithaca seminar course, when I got Carly's name wrong and I called her Kylie instead, I have gotten it at the end of every class for the entire 11 years that I've been doing this. So that's one thing. Working with student athletes, I actually serve as a faculty liaison for the football and basketball team, men's basketball team here at IC, and had been doing that for the wrestling team for a while. And I've connected with women's track and field. And so in that way, I've been able to work with prospective students who come to campus to talk through about what life is like as a student athlete, in advising roles for any student. Just thinking about the kindness that I've been offered by any of my teachers helps me to see my students as whole people as opposed to just a student in my class. And that, I think, can sometimes be exhausting, but also can be really beneficial for them and helping them just to feel like they are a real person who's seen here in the space of a campus. They don't feel like they disappear or fall through the cracks. So it's in these interesting sort of compartmentalized ways. It never all comes together at once, at least not in a way that I can identify, but I can take these things and apply them to specific parts of the job. And I think that's made it an incredibly rewarding experience for me.
Lovely. Two more things. So one question and one comment. The
Okay.
comment is the learning the names reminds me of the previous principal, or the principal that was at the elementary school that Maya attended. Now they have a different principal. He would learn the names of everybody, every new incoming. So he already knew the names of everybody already in school. So all the incoming students, he would learn all the names in a matter of days, maybe a week at the most. And so he would be at the entrance just greeting all the students name by name, and it was amazing.
I love that.
See, it's wonderful. And then the question very quickly, is college and graduate school something you want for your kids, or are you going to leave it open for them to decide?
I think it is something that I want for them, and I will leave it open for them to decide. We've had some conversations, and I know this because I've spoken to some students who come from families where they are a legacy, right? Where they've had several generations of people who've come to Ithaca College or have gone to college or have a specific job that requires a college degree and graduate school, and they're told, well, you're going to do the same thing I do, so I expect you to go to college and get a graduate degree. And I don't especially like that kind of pressure put onto anybody. And so because I have the choice, I'm not going to put that onto my own kids. But I do wish for them that they choose to go to college. And my guess is that they will, because they love so many parts of the college experience that they've been able to encounter in their early years. Because coming to college is about learning about a discipline, yes, but it's also a way to make lifelong friends. It's a way to develop a sense of independence in an environment that is, for the most part, safe. It's to have a series of guides along the way to help you figure out what these things are about yourself that are unique and how what you want to study aligns with the things that you value. I want all of that for them. And I think that they would benefit from that because I'm their dad and I work at a college and I can tell them all of these things. But as you know, having a teenage child, sometimes when you tell them things, it doesn't mean the same as when somebody else tells them the exact same thing in the exact same way. So yeah, my hope is that that without putting that pressure on them and just sort of nurturing the things that they do love about being able to come up to my office or play basketball in the outdoor courts or see plays and performances, or we're going to one of my students' recitals on Sunday, like those kinds of things will just remind them, yeah, that's a space that I want to be in and a space I want to learn and grow in for a portion of my life.
Very nice. Well, good luck with that. Whatever happens, I'm sure they'll be fine. Now, lastly, because I've taken more than an hour with you, give us now a moment or tell us now about a moment in your life when you decided that saying no was a much better option.
Yeah, this one was actually much harder to arrive at. And
really?
Yeah, and I think maybe this is like cheating or something, but you can, if it is, you can ask me for something else.
No. It's fine. Go ahead.
I for a long time, in part because I have felt imposter syndrome as somebody who's a first generation college student working this kind of job, and because I'm mixed race and have not fit squarely into like my white family or a black community or black communities of folks or friend groups that I've had, there are several things that I can point to, even like prior relationships that I've been in where I just did not have all that much self-confidence, right? I almost none at all. And so I used to do something that was actually quite bad, which was I engaged in a lot of negative self-talk. And thankfully I went to therapy and it helped me work through this. But I was very quick to condemn myself and to offer up, portions of my life in ways that, people could openly mock, and I was okay with that. And I would mock that as well. And it just perpetuated that feeling of worthlessness over and over and over again. So when is the time that I've said no? again, I didn't arrive at this on my own. I had a therapist who helped me work through this. But I eventually said no to talking negatively about myself. And that has been life altering as well. Not in exactly the same way I described and saying yes to something, but this has been life altering. And because it's relatively new, it's only something that I did less than 3 years ago. I've been finding that I feel good about myself in ways that I've never really felt good about myself before. I've always felt good as a parent, and I've always felt good in my job. And I've felt good as a son and as a sibling, but I just generally haven't felt good about myself. Like I've questioned whether or not I'm a good person and what value I have in the world and whatnot. And I don't question those things in the same way anymore. Like I think it's good and healthy to ask yourself, what does it mean to be a good person? But I don't call myself a bad person anymore, and I don't beat myself down. And so, yeah, it took a considerable amount actually, to get me to that space. And even the reason why I was seeing a therapist wasn't specifically for that, but it's an outcome of that. But yeah, it was saying no to treating myself in that way. And that's been, for me, saying no in that way has been one of the most personally validating things that I've done.
Was that, I'm thinking of like quitting smoking. And
Mhm,
I know people quit. When they quit, there are different ways of quitting.
mhm,
But I want to know if your quitting was more like my dad quitting smoking, which was one day he used to smoke a lot, and one day he couldn't breathe. And then he thought, I wouldn't like to die not being able to breathe, emphysema.
mhm.
And then he quit cold turkey and never went back.
Wow.
Were you like, was that a process for you, or were you like, I'm starting today? Not that you stopped that negative talk, but was that the day when you said, so was that a day, or did you started noticing more and more
Mhm. Yeah, it
that you
was,
stopped doing that?
well, it was less of a cold turkey thing for me. It was definitely a process. And knowing, being able to look back on it now for the process that it is or has been, made me understand how deeply ingrained that was. And I think it had to be a process, because even as I would consciously tell myself, don't talk about yourself in that way, don't say these things, and or don't let somebody else say this thing about you, I would find myself just slipping up and saying things randomly because my mouth was so accustomed to saying that, and my brain was so accustomed to saying that, that it took a while to kind of unlearn that part of it, and then to relearn the self-confidence part. So I had to unlearn all these things about self-loathing and whatnot. And I think maybe there's some part of that that I'm still unlearning. But yeah, it was definitely a process. And the closest I came to cold turkey is when I was meeting with my therapist and talking through this particular issue. One of the things that she had said to me, because I said I struggle with this, and I know it's a thing that I need to work through, but I feel like I need more time to do it. And she had said, listen, Derek, you can take all the time that you want, but one of the things that you need to also recognize is that the time that you're taking and the process that you're going through is something that your children are watching you go through.
I was going to
And
ask you about that.
yeah, and so as somebody who's solo parenting, for the most part, these two adolescent children, it it sort of struck me like, oh, what am I teaching them? I mean, every day we're learning things from one another just by virtue of occupying the same space. So what am I teaching them when I've talked about myself in this way, or how long it's taking me to undo talking about myself in this way, or to learn a new and positive way of talking about myself? And so yeah, this has to stop, because I can't keep teaching them. I can't keep showing them these things that they are learning, even if I'm not telling them directly to ingest it. They are internalizing it. Uh, I need to speed this up as much as I can in a way that still works for me. It's still healthy for me, but also doesn't allow them to continue seeing me do that to myself. And I've now been able to recognize some of those patterns in them, and we've been talking through that, and they've had their own counselors that they've been working with, and so it's been I think life altering for them, which of course has just made our relationship, the three of us, just all that much more positive. And we communicate so much better. than we did before. And I think we largely communicated in healthy ways prior to that, but we're able to recognize for each other sometimes when somebody's saying something that either makes us upset or it makes us upset because you're saying that about yourself, and that's not actually something you should be saying about yourself, or if you're saying something to or about me that upsets. We have a lot better and healthier communication around that. And I don't know, had I not said no, had I just kept engaging in that, I'm a little frightened to think about what our communication would look like, or whether or not we'd be doing this for one another.
And it's so wonderful what you're doing, because, I mean, in general, the way the images we get of how men should be raised to be men, vulnerability is not part of it in general. And the most wonderful men are the most vulnerable ones. Also, you are doing it yourself, you're raising them to be open to that part, which is one of the best gifts you can give them as
Absolutely.
growing men.
Yeah, they are absolutely wonderful young men already.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I always deeply appreciate is that whenever they go somewhere else, because they're at an age, you probably experienced this with Maya, right? At an age where her social network has just expanded almost infinitely. So I'm hearing from people that I don't know all that well, who are the parents of their friends, and they'll go to hang out at their house, and they will text me to just rave about how polite and kind my kids are. And they're not always that way at home, but but they are polite and kind and thoughtful and helpful. And that makes me think, yes, they're really good, and they talk to these parents, right? They don't shy away, which is nice. They are willing to converse with them, and I think that matters to me as well. Like they don't just see them as like, oh, these are the looming parents who you never address. It's like, you've invited me into your home, so let me say thank you and converse with you, and that's really mattered to me. And I don't know that one of these things necessarily is fuel for the other, but I think they are connected in a way. It's like, yeah, because I'm trying to show them how to communicate better with me, they're learning how to communicate better with adults more generally, and that seems to be a really positive thing.
It's like what you said with the teaching, that it doesn't all come back together in one moment. It's just you use whatever, consciously or unconsciously, they're going to express whatever they have been learning through you and living with you and you parenting them. Well, this is a very nice and lovely way to end this conversation. I really appreciate your time first, because I went over. I'm so sorry. You may have to teach a class right now. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for the invitation,
had a
Lucia.
good time.
Yes, I had a fantastic time, and this is, I feel, I don't know, very special just in being invited to be interviewed in this way, but also that you were connecting me with the interviews that you've already done, people that I know, and it's been wonderful to just learn more about you and the way that you converse with them, and then these people that I know. So yeah, all of this, I'm all for. This is amazing. Thank you so much.
And the same way as the cookie exchange parties, that are the comment that I made about knowing more people in your English department. So far, I've interviewed 3 of you. And in the politics department, I have 1 pending, but she's busy. So anyway, thank you so much. Send me pictures of whatever you would like to share, starting from when you were a kid or not, you decide. So just send me whatever pictures or images you think are gonna help our viewers to then embody all these things that you talked about and share with us today. And I'll add them to the video. And thank you so much, and have a lovely day.
You too, Lucia. Bye.
Bye, Derek.